One of y'all hit us up and said Dan Lanning will not win a national title at Oregon. Now, those of y'all that have followed this show, you know we are very high on Dan Lanning. We are very high on the future at Oregon. We picked him to go undefeated this year. We picked him to win the national title when that bracket came out. I love the way they're built. However, let's address this now. Is it unpopular to say that Dan Lanning won't win a national title at Oregon? I think it is. Is it crazy? I mean, statistically speaking, no. There's been a lot of great coaches that have never won national titles. Like historically, you got guys like Frank Beamer, one of the best to ever do it. Bo Schembechler at Michigan, never won a national title. Right now in college football, guys like Brian Kelly and James Franklin, Steve Sarkisian hasn't won a national title as a head coach, that is. So it's not, I don't think, irresponsible to make this claim. But, there's that but, we absolutely believe that Dan Lanning, to respond to this take, will win a national title before it's all said and done at Oregon for him. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first is trends aren't everything in college football. It's hard to say that success is linear in anything, especially a sport where the ball is shaped funny and you got 11, 18, and 22-year-olds going at it on a Saturday afternoon. Yeah, there's probably some variance there. However, Dan Lanning, every year at Oregon, as the head coach, they just steadily just increase in terms of what they do on the field. More wins every single year. Last year, they get to the Pac-12 championship. They fall short. This year, they move into what I would call the best conference in college football from 2024, and they win the whole thing. They beat, mind you, the national champion in Ohio State in Eugene. Now, they played them again, and what happened. But the point I'm making here is when you look at the trend, who's to say that Dan Lanning has peaked at Oregon just yet? Who's to say he's peaked as a head coach? He's still new to this as being a head coach. It's his third year being a head coach, period. You don't think he's going to get better? It took Ryan Day 6 years to win a national title. It took Kirby Smart 6 years to win a national title. It took Jim Harbaugh something like 13 years total doing it. Something like 8 years at Michigan to win a national title. Something in that range. This is hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. I've made this point before, but I think when you look at Dan Lanning and what he is as a head coach, he just does all the things that are required to win at the highest level. In terms of like what you can control. Like the games are the games, but what you can control is what? How you build your team and how your team plays. Like recruiting is one of the core principles of what Dan Lanning is as a head coach. And since he's been at Oregon, essentially every single year, they've been in the top 10. The last 3 years, for sure, they've been in the top 10. It's not just the stars, though. It's the actual function of what their roster is. You look at Oregon, line of scrimmage play is as good as it is in college football, in my mind. Like, you take the floor of what they are year in and year out, Oregon consistently has dudes that are able to give you fits for 4 quarters. Oregon's going to be a physical football team, offensively and defensively. That's the first part. But in addition to that, they've also, maybe very subtly, it feels subtle to me, they've kind of become a quarterback and wide receiver destination at the recruiting level and the transfer portal level. Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel, both Heisman Trophy finalists. Tez Johnson goes for 80 catches in back-to-back years at Oregon. Before him, Troy Franklin puts up incredible numbers the season before that. Like, Oregon, I think, continues to prove there is a blueprint for success and development to get to the next level even at Oregon with what Will Stein has done offensively these last couple of seasons. So what I just said, there is an explosive element offensively. There is physicality defensively and offensively. Look at the secondary. There's proof of concept there as well with dudes in the league like Christian Gonzalez. There's a lot to like about how Oregon's built. And I just mentioned all the different parts of a football team, essentially. Oregon's real deal versatile. And in the 12-team playoff, that is now a non-negotiable. In the 4-team model, especially the BCS model, but in the 4-team model, you could probably, run your conference, get to the 4-team playoff. Maybe you get lucky with who you draw. You maybe just match up well, and then in the national title game, you're 4 quarters away from winning the whole thing. In the 12-team playoff, you're going to have to shapeshift a little bit. like Bruce Lee says, you got to be water a little bit there. And that's, I think, what Oregon's able to do with what I just described to you. Quarterback play, trenches, defense, all those things. You got to go rock fight mode. I see a world now in the future where Oregon's able to win those games. You got to win a shootout. Oregon's able to win those games. And just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Like, again, if I had to place money, I'd say in the next 3 years, Dan Lanning and Oregon win a national title. That would be my bet. Because as we look to the future of college football, they're consistently set at the positions that matter, and they're consistently there with a high talent floor across the board at Oregon. So what I just said, if they get into a spot where they got a rematch with another Big Ten team in the playoff, I feel good about their chances there. If they got to do a shootout with a team like a USC or an Ole Miss and they got to go toe for toe, or toe to toe rather, blow for blow, however you want to say it, I trust Oregon in that context. So again, everyone's going to jump on the idea of, well, hey, we just optically remember Oregon getting to these big spots and falling flat. That's just kind of who Oregon is in our minds, and we don't really care too much about who the head coach is, but that uniform, that logo, it's cursed. I don't know what we do this in college football. I really don't. Dan Lanning wasn't around for the loss in the national title game when they lost to Ohio State. Dan Lanning wasn't there when they came up short in previous years in big games. It's not Dan Lanning's situation he has to deal with. Now, they lost to Ohio State last year, 100% true. But that team also went on to win the national title, and I think we're going to talk about them being one of the more talented rosters in college football over the course of the next decade or so. So if it's about the future, if it's about where we're hedging our bet, the burden of proof is on Dan Lanning. No way around it, but with how he recruits, how they build their roster, their character, their core traits, all those things, to me, Dan Lanning, it's a matter of when, not if, he wins the national title. And when it happens, we will be sure to revisit this, not to be a whole I told you so thing, but just to unpack how and why it happened, and it'll be a good time for all of us. But Dan Lanning, national title, happening. But we appreciate the unpopular take. We absolutely appreciate the unpopular take.